we're grateful for your time. We're going to make the most of it. You're going to get a lot out of this session on emotional intelligence. And a couple intro slides here before we get into the content of what we're going to talk about with emotional intelligence with Darcy. A few people that if you've been a part of the webinar so far, you've seen my face, you've seen Patrick's face before, but here we are. I'm on the left, Patrick on the right. You'll hear from Patrick towards the end. We will be the moderators, and then a little bit about CCB. If you're not familiar with us and our history, we've been around for about 29 years. I think we're in our 29th year as an organization, and our goal since the beginning has been to serve those that are serving others. So regardless of your tax code, we come alongside and help simplify IT. That's our niche. But you're here because of leadership stuff. So that kind of ties into something else that we reacted to in the marketplace, which was, as you see on all the slides, the impact of leadership. Well, we want to answer very quickly, well, why? Why the impact of leadership, and what is that all about? Well, it was like our inception with the technology side. There was a need for nonprofit pricing through Microsoft. So that's how we got our start on the IT side. And as we've had conversations on the leadership side, we just started utilizing our resources and tapping into people that we knew and conversations we were having to push out content. And that's some of the why. Our just cause, to steal a phrase from Simon Sinek, is to bring value to current leaders that have an authoritative title and those of us that are coming up in the ranks of leadership with tangible, practical, accessible leadership tools and resources. And that's why Darcy's here. So that's what the impact of leadership is all about, and that's why you're here. So going into our guest speaker. So Darcy is going to bring it. She is, to pronounce her last name, I messed it up a couple times before. So phonetically, Darcy Luoma. So get it right. She has served as the director of the United States Senator for Herb Kohl's office for 12 years before launching the Darcy Luoma Coaching and Consulting, where she and her team focus on creating high-performing people and teams. So while Darcy has a double major in German and mathematics, the only time she uses these skills is when she's trying to double a recipe for German Black Forest cake. And now I want some cake, goodness gracious. She first discovered her love for coaching while doing her master's thesis at Pepperdine University on the impact of life coaching. And she is a master certified coach who designed the rigorous certified professional coach program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and now serves as the director of training. She was honored to be voted Madison, Wisconsin's favorite life coach several times. Darcy is in her 21st season of doing triathlons of every length, including a full Ironman. Her lifetime love of being physically fit for her body created the spark for her model of being thoughtfully fit for the mind. So when she isn't training her body or mind, she loves spicy chai lattes, afternoon naps, and yin yoga. But her most important and most challenging role is being mom to two energetic and spunky preteen daughters who somehow convinced her recently to get a foster dog, and it's serious, a 90-pound Great Dane Pit Bull mix. Holy moly, that's a nice dog and a big dog. She is here today to help all of us be thoughtfully fit. So as you silently clap for her, please join in welcoming Madison's favorite life coach and professional yoga napper, Darcy Luoma. Go ahead, Darcy.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Steve and Patrick. It is an honor to be here today. And I love the topic because having emotional intelligence skills for handling crises, we are in a crisis right now. And it's hard to believe. I mean, really, that 6 weeks ago, everything was quote unquote normal. Now, we didn't know or think at the time that it was normal, but now in hindsight, it was normal. And for my business, everything changed in about a week. So it was Monday, I was talking with my team and talking to them about the fact that some colleagues and people on the East and West Coast were having to shut down and deal with the ramifications of the coronavirus. And we were saying, gosh, we feel so lucky that we are based here primarily in the Midwest and haven't had to worry about that. Well, by Thursday, we had 12 events canceled. And by the following Monday, we had every single event, training, retreat, corporate workshop for March, April, and May, canceled, rescheduled, or transitioned to virtual. So everything changed. And while those of you watching have probably a different scenario, I'm guessing I'm not alone, that your business has also changed and that your leadership skills have been tested. And indeed, leading is tough. It's tough enough to lead when things are normal, quote unquote. But leading during crisis is brutal. And of course, with this crisis, we started out by seeing hoarding. And I remember going to Costco, and I hadn't really tuned into what the problems were, and I couldn't get any toilet paper. That then brought us into social distancing and having to be 6 feet apart and seeing all of these pieces of tape at the grocery store to stay away from people. And of course, it then evolved to recommendations to wear face masks out in public. And of course, then the stay-at-home orders that the different governors are putting into place. And what I have found in working with clients, and we do social distance coaching to help people raise their awareness and share their struggles and challenges through this time, is something we created. And we found that there's a number of people who kind of are embracing this new reality. They're like, oh my God, I don't have to deal with traffic and a commute. Thank you. What a gift. I can go for a walk in the middle of the day with my dog and I don't have to worry about kenneling him. I mean, that's a new problem we're learning after having Sirius for just almost 2 weeks now. I get to spend quality time doing things that I didn't get to do because I've got so much more time, not running around to events and meetings. And yet, there is another perspective of those people who are not embracing this. As a matter of fact, I had a client recently text me. She said, oh my God, Darcy, I'm either going to be 500 pounds divorced or at the Betty Ford clinic when all this is done. There are a lot of challenges, and I'm finding the challenges seem to be supercharged for those of us who are parents. And if my social media feed is any indication of that, there has been a whole bunch of posts daily still coming through about the challenges of all of a sudden having to homeschool, having to be a teacher, having to share your space with your kids and with, in some cases, a spouse when you haven't had to do that before. And it has created some added dynamics. And certainly all of us have had to pivot and adjust. And I know in our household, now we have tried to find creative ways to fill our time when we're not going to swim team and to band concerts and to the gym and all the things we used to do. So for our family, started out with the girls convincing me to get our foster dog. And it's been a lot of walks at the park with him. The girls have started to dress him up, and they also have decided that the cat needs to be in on that fun. They're doing creative things like having picnics out on the front lawn. Even when here in Madison, Wisconsin, it's like 38 degrees out. You can see they're all bundled up in their blankets. They've got their tea set, their guitar, their pillows. And doing homemade volcanoes and trying them out, which it was kind of an epic fail, but I give them an A+ for their creativity and their efforts. They pulled out my prom dresses and tried to recreate my 80s hair and makeup, and then next pulled out my wetsuit from my triathlon. So, and culminating with a webinar with, where we were playing with having our animals and our pets be on the Zoom call. And what's crazy is that we're doing all of this while you still need to work and you still need to lead. And that's really hard because nothing is normal anymore. And the added dynamic of what has created an additional challenge as I'm working with clients and organizations and coaching leaders who are having to deal with this, is the fact that we don't know when it's going to end. And so the uncertainty and the fear that that creates is exponential. Because as leaders, you know how to create a crisis plan. You know how to create a strategy and how to execute that strategy when there's an acquisition that was unexpected, when sales go down. With this global pandemic, the challenge is you don't know how to plan for it. So somebody said to me early on, well, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I have to say I disagree, because at least in a marathon, you know when it's going to end. When you get to 26.2 miles, so you can pace yourself. Right now, we don't know if we're at mile 3 or if we're at mile 20. And that has evoked a range of emotions. And I invite you, if you're listening, to go ahead and use the chat box to share what has been your emotional journey. What emotions is this bringing up for you? At the beginning, when COVID first hit, there was some initial emotions that I think were pretty shared across the board. Now that we are months into this, the emotions are expanding. And we are experiencing emotions in any given day that we maybe hadn't experienced before. There's a roller coaster of emotions. As a matter of fact, one of the blog posts that we wrote recently was the COVID coaster of emotions. And what I want to share with you today is, how do you handle crises well, given all of these emotions? And when leaders handle crises well, they are able to acknowledge their emotions. So it's not about suppressing their emotions and saying, well, I shouldn't be sad, I shouldn't be frustrated, I shouldn't be angry. You acknowledge those emotions, but you don't lead with your emotions. When you're angry, you don't yell. As a leader, when you're angry, you're able to choose how you respond. And as leaders, we have an added responsibility to also be able to acknowledge and navigate those complex emotions of all the people that you're leading. So you not only have to manage your own emotions, but also the emotions of those people who are going through this. And indeed, that's what emotional intelligence is, and that's what we want to take a look at today. And this was a concept that was popularized in the 90s by Daniel Goleman. And I do lots of workshops and trainings, and we've got day-long and multi-series programs around emotional intelligence. And so for today, just kind of bottom line it in the simplest form. When you have high emotional intelligence, you have self-awareness and self-management. And so what does that mean? You are able to handle yourself thoughtfully in any situation instead of reacting based on your emotions in any given moment. And the strongest leaders, there's lots of research that shows the strongest leaders have high emotional intelligence. And those leaders who are able to lead well, especially during crises, have stronger teams and more successful organizations. As a matter of fact, psychologists now agree that a child's emotional intelligence is a greater prediction of their later success in life than their IQ. So strong leaders are self-aware. And anybody knows that if you're working with somebody who isn't self-aware and they're assigned to your team, you're frustrated. Strong leaders can self-manage. That person that's assigned to your team, they might be really good technically at what they do. And you say, oh, I wish they weren't on this project. Because if they don't have high emotional intelligence, they're hard to work with. They don't manage themselves well in the moment. So the question becomes, how do you as a leader build your emotional intelligence, and as importantly, how do you help increase the emotional intelligence of your team members and your employees? And that's where Thoughtfully Fit comes in. This is a model that I started to research. I've been coaching for decades, thousands of hours, and I started to notice that there are some core issues that every client brings into coaching. And so I developed the model Thoughtfully Fit to address those core issues. And it's a metaphor for being physically fit. So we all know that if you're physically fit, every movement is easier. If you wanted to go out and run a 5K, Steve and I yesterday were talking about him running a 5K, and you haven't been training, it's going to be hard. But if you take time to practice and train for that 5K, that same event that has the same hills, it's the same 3.1 miles, is going to feel easier. It's not that the race course is any easier, it's that you're stronger, you're fitter. Fitter? You're more fit. In the same way, when you're thoughtfully fit, your life and your relationships are easier. So it's not that there isn't going to be adversity and conflict and challenges and crises and struggles. There's still going to be that moment when you find your sales dipping and you have to deal with that. When you have to manage the conflict on the board of directors because there's different personalities. When you have to figure out how to lead through a global pandemic. And here's what happens when you aren't thoughtful. You overreact. You say something that you later regret. You make a snap reaction in the moment. You blame others. You stonewall. And what is challenging about that is then you have to put on all this energy to go back and clean up the mess from handling yourself in a way that wasn't thoughtful. Because when you're thoughtfully fit and you handle yourself thoughtfully in every situation, you have that ability to have more energy to focus on what matters most. Instead of having to go and clean up the mess from reacting poorly. And certainly it's harder to react thoughtfully in a crisis than it is to lead when you are not dealing with adversity and conflict. And at the core, when you are thoughtfully fit, you are aware that you always have choices and you always have control. And part of what I am noticing in this current crisis, and what I notice when I'm working with executives and leaders and teams, is there are times when you feel like you don't have any choices, where you have no control. And that's okay. If that's the emotion that you're feeling right now and you're frustrated and angry because you don't have any control about how long we are going to be social distancing, how long, if you are not designated as an essential business, you have to remain closed. That feels like everything's out of your control and like you have no choices. However, I want to challenge that mindset. And I think the strongest leaders challenge that mindset. And I know a thing or two about surviving crises. My life changed with one phone call. It was March 17th of 2016 when my neighbor called me. And she said, "Darcy, what is happening at your house?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm not at home. I'm at a meeting. Why?" And she said, "There are 40 or 50 police cars or SWAT teams with guns surrounding your house. And they just took out your husband in handcuffs, barefoot. He wouldn't look at us." In that moment, my life exploded and my nightmare began. The most extreme crisis that I could ever have imagined. My husband ultimately was arrested for sexual assault of a minor that he had met online. When he left that day, he never came home. He was the full-time stay-at-home parent for our two daughters, who at that time were 8 and 9 years old. I found myself all of a sudden in the middle of the worst nightmare I had ever experienced, where I had to navigate the legal system. I had to figure out how to get divorced. Certainly that was never on my radar screen. As a matter of fact, I was planning for our 10-year wedding anniversary the very next day, and our spring break trip. We were going to take an RV trip around the country to the national parks. I now had to learn how to be a single mom, how to keep my business alive. I finished my stint with Senator Cole on January 2nd of 2013, and I launched my business on January 3rd. It's hard to launch a business, but all of a sudden to have to lead and try to keep my business alive through this crisis was exponentially harder. And then I had to learn to do things that John did, like cook and use the washing machine and things that I had taken for granted that I never really thought about before. At that time, all I wanted to do was to crawl into bed and hide. I didn't want to deal with this. I didn't know how to deal with this. As a matter of fact, I also had to deal with the anger of my friends, who one of them called and said, "Do you want me to come over and put all his shit on the lawn and burn it?" And so there was a lot of, not only did I have a lot of emotions, anger, fear, anxiety, unknown, sadness, grief, I was dealing with anxiety and emotions with my friends and family, who also were in shock and utter disbelief of this. And I had to come back to my core. Every moment when I wanted to shut down, when I felt like there was no hope, like there were no options, I had to come back to my core. I chose to come back to my core, to look at what do I control, because as a mom, that was my responsibility. As a leader, as a CEO of a company, I had to look at and pivot. What in this moment do I control? And what choices do I have? And that's what I want to share with you today, is that you always also can come back to your core in any crisis, in any situation. And so I want to give you a core workout that you can start to do now and that you can continue when you leave here today. And don't worry, we're not going to be doing any sit-ups, no Pilates, no planks. Those certainly you can also do that. But I'd like to challenge you right now. And feel free if you'd like to share your thoughts in the chat. And we're going to give you time after I'm done with the presentation to open it up for Q&A and to hear some of your thoughts. Right now, in these unprecedented times, what can you control? There's a whole lot you can't control. And if you can embrace that perspective and go back to your core and look at what can you control, that's where your power lies as a leader. Because you have 100% control of you, of how you lead, of how you respond when emotions are high, of what you choose to make up around meaning, around things, right? You can choose to feel resentful and angry and be a victim, or you can choose to make up meaning that others are struggling and that you need to lead with compassion. And what's key about this then is you let go of what you can't control. And it's actually very freeing. It changes your perspective. Okay, I can't control coronavirus. I can't control when this is going to end. I can control how I respond and what I do. The second part of your core workout is exploring right now what is possible. It's easy as a leader, as a human, we're flawed. This is hard to look at what's not possible, what's impossible, what's hard. Right now, I challenge you to explore what is possible. And it might feel like you only have one course of action. But the reality is you always have choices. You always have an ability to come back to what you control and look at what choices you have. And it always comes back to your core. So, question is, how do you build your core? And how do you help your employees build their core, especially during times of crisis? This is the core of the Thoughtfully Fit model. And I want to give you 3 simple steps, because it's easy to say you need to have high emotional intelligence. You need to be self-aware when you're frustrated, and then you need to self-manage. But how do you do that? That's the challenge. The great news is you can focus on building your core through these 3 steps. And you can practice. And the more you train and the more you practice, the easier it gets. Just like that 5K that Steve is going to do. So step 1, you have to pause. This is essential. This is the first step because it kicks you off of autopilot so that your knee-jerk reaction isn't being a jerk. There's a lot of research that shows when you can quiet your mind, it's almost like if you think about that snow globe, there's so much going on right now. If you can pause and allow all of that to settle, you have access then to more thoughtful actions. And so I want you to think of the pause like a stop sign. When you're driving along and you get to a stop sign, you don't stop and, take out your laptop and eat your lunch. You just pause. You stop long enough to raise your awareness, to look when it's safe, you proceed. Now, we wouldn't have to stop, but you might get away with it sometimes, but certainly it wouldn't be long before you would crash and have a disaster. The pause is the essential first step, and it sets you up then for step 2, which is to think. And the think is where you are able to explore what your choices are and what do you control. The think is all about asking those thoughtful questions. But if you're just going without hitting the pause button, you never give yourself the gift of time to think. And leaders, that's your job, to be strategic, to be innovative, to be inspiring. And it requires you to be able to think, what do I control? What are my choices? What is possible? And then with the new awareness that you're having from pausing and thinking, step 3 is to act. You have to act. You can't just cycle in the think and have analysis paralysis. Leaders have to make bold decisions and have to act. I want to tell you a quick story. My daughter, this is Josie, several years ago, and she decided she wanted to do basketball, kids' best basketball. And she would get the ball and she would, dribble, sometimes double dribble, and she'd pivot and she'd look, and the other kids are like, over here, throw it to me, shoot, the basket's open. And she'd pivot, and then she'd pivot and she'd be thinking, oh, should I pass it? Should I throw it? And she was paralyzed. Leaders have to take the shot. That's what's critical when you're building your core, when you're building your emotional intelligence. You always come back to your core. And it involves being aware of your choices. Oops, sorry about that. Focusing what you control. And always taking that time to pause, think, and then act. So here's the deal. We are in this for the long haul. You are in this for the long haul. You as a leader have the ability to inspire, to motivate, and to help your team, your company, your organization, your nonprofit get through this crisis. And what's key is that you start right where you are. Right in this moment. If you realize that you're reactive, that you don't have that ability to pause in the moment, start small. When you go to the grocery store and somebody grabs the last thing of toilet paper, instead of reacting in that moment, taking that time to pause and think, you know what? Maybe they need it more than I do. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. What are my choices right now? I could blow up, I could explode, I could overreact, or I could choose a different response. I always say, don't start with your mother-in-law, right? Start with the easy, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I guarantee that if you practice and you train, that you've got this, that your emotional intelligence will increase, and that your organization will make it through. I want to leave you with this quote, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A and comments. Connect to your core, and you'll find strength. Act from your core, and you'll move mountains. And in honor of our social distancing, I'm going to give you all a big virtual high five and tell you thank you so much for being with me this morning, and Steve and Patrick and the Impact of Leadership for inviting me. Before I turn it back to you, Steve, I did want to just let you all know that I've put together a resource for all of you if you'd like to get this. It's called endurance, not excuses. And endurance is one of the 6 practices of being thoughtfully fit. And we've broken down how do you build your resilience in 9 simple steps. And so if you'd like this free resource, right now you can just take out your phone and you open up your text messages. And once you have your text messages open, in the to line where you would put, I'm going to send a text to Patrick, you would instead put 33444. And then in the message line, you'll type endurance. Doesn't need to be all caps. When you hit send, you'll get an automatic reply asking for your email address. So when you put in your email address, this will automatically be sent to you as a PDF. You can read it, you can print it, you can share it with your team. It is a free resource for you to help you increase your endurance during these tough times to overcome the obstacles that we're experiencing. And in full transparency, I just want to let you know that by signing up for that resource, you'll also be signed up to get my free weekly tips. Every Wednesday, we send out a short email that has thoughtfully fit tips that shares stories and case studies and strategies and skills on how to be thoughtfully fit. If you don't want to get it, or you read it for a while and you're overwhelmed, you can unsubscribe at any time. So with that, I thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Awesome, Darcy. Thank you so much. It was that easy on my end as well to sign up for the free resource and the emails. And so if you haven't done it, do it right now. Send a text message over. And as a reminder, if you navigate to the bottom of your screen, at least this is how it worked for me, move your cursor around, go to the bottom. If you look for, it says participants and then Q&A is what mine looks like. We do have a question in there, but submit your questions now if you have a question for Darcy. But here's one for you, Darcy, from Kurt. He just is, first of all, making a statement of thanking you for your vulnerability. He had a life-changing call himself and changed his trajectory of his consulting and his life and his business. And his question is, what was the biggest thing that changed in your messaging to your clients post the phone call that you got?
Great question, Kurt. And I'm guessing that whatever your challenge was, the fact that you're here, you're working your way through. And I commend you for that. So interesting. I oftentimes get asked the biggest challenge, or how I message this to my kids. And so that's where I thought your question was going to go. And I think I'll answer both, because I anticipate other people are like, yeah, how did you? And I guess it's almost the same for both. But I'll start with my kids. I worked with 5 child psychologists during that time to try to figure out how do I deal with this. And in a nutshell, what I learned is to lead with truth and to share in nuggets, and then let them ask questions. So don't overwhelm and don't overshare. And while I haven't thought of it this way before, Kurt, I think that was the same thing with my business and with my clients. And to lead with truth and to be honest and transparent, but not to overshare. And I think that was critical, because my clients figured out, and I also, I hired a crisis communications firm to help me through this. And the president of the firm said, Darcy, you need to take some time off. And I said, I can't take it. If I don't work, I don't make money. This is not an option as a self-employed business owner. And I said, but given the fact that I hired you and I'm paying money for you to advise me and I'm not thinking straight, I'm going to do it. I disagree. That was the most critical thing that I did during that time, is I designed a longer pause. It was actually several months, because in this case, the story was getting worse instead of it being, 48 news cycle and leaving, moving on. It grew. That pause helped me to identify my message to my clients. It helped me identify my message not only to my clients, my kids, but also to their friends' parents and to the neighbors. And so I think the biggest thing, and I literally kept coming back to my core. In my Thoughtfully Fit model was officially it came alive after years of research on a Saturday, and we had it. It was we were so excited, and it was 5 days later that my husband was arrested. And my attorney said, don't talk to anybody about anything. So all of a sudden I became ground zero to test drive Thoughtfully Fit. And I constantly came back to my core. So if you're trying to figure out what to share with your clients and how much, the biggest thing I can say is take the time to pause, to think and ask yourself those thoughtful questions before you act. That was a long answer. So thank you, Kurt, for asking that.
No, that's good. We've got a couple other questions coming in. Before we bounce to one of these other ones, if you wouldn't mind, could you talked about your kids a little bit, and I know that we had the chance to do the podcast interview, which was awesome. But could you just give a little bit of a taste of like, what was that like? I've got 4 kids of my own, and I cannot imagine. So how was that? What did you do? How did you handle that?
It was horrible. I mean, their dad was a full-time stay-at-home dad who did everything. They had never not had him put them to bed at night or make them breakfast in the morning. And all of a sudden, they got off the school bus, and he was gone. And he never came back. And it was awful. Part of what I did when I realized, I mean, the news, the stories were all over the news, the nightly news. I get the paper, I still get a newspaper from the end of the driveway. I take it in, and there's his mugshot. It was all over social media. I realized pretty quickly that I needed to protect them in a more extreme way, and so I actually moved them to Minnesota. Thankfully, my sister agreed to take them, and they enrolled in school there and finished out the school year in Minnesota. That also gave me a pause to think through and to talk with a child psychologist and to figure out how to manage this. Mm-hmm. The girls, part of what we did, I led with truth. The first child therapist I called, Steve, said, well, first of all, I mean, it was that next day, it was Friday, the day after. He said, okay, tell him he's on vacation. Buy yourself some time. And I was like, what? You've got to be kidding me. We're supposed to go on vacation next week as a family, and I just am going to lie to them and say, oh, Daddy decided to go on his own. I couldn't do that. So I led with truth at an age-appropriate level, and I told them that. I said, I will be honest with you at an age-appropriate level. You can ask anything you want. And I'm going to choose thoughtfully how to answer it to protect you and to support you through this.
That's good.
That helped tremendously. The girls now they're back. They came back after a couple of months. They are now in 6th and 8th grade, and they're thriving. They're doing amazing. We have a relationship with their dad, my ex-husband. I have found forgiveness. They love their dad. They connect with him. They go visit him at the prison. They have really figured out how to navigate this, and they're in their new normal.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to hold back from asking you about the process of forgiveness after a traumatic experience, but I think maybe we pick that up a different time, because I want to get to a couple of these questions, as many as we can. I know we still have a couple minutes. We're good. This one's from Emily. So she is saying that like a lot of businesses, they had to do a 180-degree, pivot. And so they're a gym that had to move everything online in 48 hours. But they're finding some of the trainers are really struggling, missing the personal connection. Training from Zoom, it only goes so far, kind of a thing. They're struggling with the whole different set of tasks and responsibilities. What have you found to be the most successful ways to support your team and to support their emotional health during this time?
Great question. Was that Emily?
Emily, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Yeah, my gym is shut down, and the owner is having the same struggles with employees. And so one of the things I have found as a leader, that is the best gift that you can give to your team, is create space to connect with them. So be courageous and be honest in terms of what the reality is. And also create space to design your new alliance moving forward. Like, okay, nothing's the same. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of anxiety. What do you need to be supported during this time? How do we want to design? If you're being creative, I know, some gyms are still doing online and having trainers. I mean, if they are still a part of your team, and you are, in other words, they haven't been laid off, which creates other issues and challenges as well. Taking time to say, how do we want to communicate with each other? What support do you need? How do we want to be when things get difficult? Because now in this new iteration of our business and our relationship, we're gonna let each other down. We're gonna make mistakes. We're going to misstep. How do we want to deal with that and handle it? Because it's no longer that you can just pop in and say, hey, Emily, I've got a problem. I'm kind of frustrated. So taking that time to ask those questions and to design your new alliance for COVID. And then when we do get back to our new normal, and I say new normal because I don't think things will go back to how they were. Right. At that time, again, taking the time to ask those questions and to design the new alliance. What's the culture, the atmosphere that we want to create in this uncertainty, in this known? What will help you to really thrive during this? What support do you need in order to thrive? And how do we want to be together when it's challenging and when it's difficult? Asking those questions and allowing your team members to co-design together how they want to be is incredibly helpful.
It's good. It's good. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be the same. But after any arduous journey or training or anything that pushes us to our limits, you're different on the other side. So it's good to not lose yourself along the way, which is basically what I'm taking away from what you just said. Pour in right now so that you can keep going on the other side of this. So there, just as a setting the stage for everybody that has submitted questions, we won't be able to get to all your questions right now. But depending on time and that, I'm going to do another one right now, and then I'll send these over to Darcy so she has them. I'm not going to commit her to getting those back to you within 24 hours or something, but some of your questions might actually get answered in that free resource or other. If you go to her website, there's a ton of great information there as well. So I just want to plug that again because I don't want to let folks down, but we're not going to be able to get to all these questions because there's some really good, deep questions here. But one more before, maybe two more before we go. So Scott is making a statement, very beneficial webinar. He's thanking you for being here and speaking the way that you have. He's a nursing scheduler, and this has been a really particular challenging time for his staff. They've remained positive and are able to remember the why behind what they do. So that's fantastic, the why of why they show up every day. So his question is, do you have any suggestions on how to keep this positivity up as the crisis continues to go on? Basically, not seeing the end in sight. So how do you keep that positivity going?
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for the work that you're doing on the front lines. I can't express enough the gratitude for those of you who are essential and handling all of this in the most extreme way. The answer I'm going to give you is the opposite of what you might think. So sometimes people think, I got to stay positive and I got to be positive for my team and we have to have rah-rah. I would say acknowledge when you're feeling not positive, when you're feeling deflated, when you're feeling frustrated, when you're feeling angry. Oh, I can't believe that person came in, and wasn't social distancing or didn't have whatever. Allow space for those feelings. So again, when you have emotional intelligence and when you're leading fully, it's not that and how many times have you talked to somebody who comes in and they're crying or they're frustrated and you say, well, calm down, don't be angry. When does that ever help? Right? You just need to be positive or see the bright side. I have one friend who is chronically positive and it doesn't help because, I'll say something and she's like, well, at least, at least the girls didn't die. Well, at least, always finding the positive and I don't feel seen and witnessed in my pain. So I think one of the things that helps you have that positivity is to acknowledge the pain. Whether it's for yourself or for others, allow space for that. And you will notice a shift start to happen. So I talked about these social distance coaching. Every Thursday, we decided part of what we want to do to give back is we allow a small group of people to register to come in and we do social distance coaching from 12, I don't even know what the time is going to be. We're going to open up in May soon. So if you sign up for that resource, you'll get an email that says when the May sessions are. And if you want to join in, we can talk through this. I bring that up because one of the things I notice in those social distance coaching, small group coaching, people come in and they're heavy and we create space to just allow them to share what is the challenge, the struggles, the emotions. And then naturally what happens is a shift. Naturally, instead of like, well, just be happy, just be positive, by being able to share the frustrations and the challenges, what happens is, okay, I feel better. I got that off. So here's what I control. Here's what I can do. And there is an ability to be positive. So that's a short answer that I hope is helpful as a nugget.
So We haven't done this so far. We're past time, but there's a question that's rolling around. If we're okay to keep going, I mean, I know a couple people might have to drop off, but Darcy, I've got one more. It's kind of a loaded question. If that's all right, I see you nodding. Okay, so I'll throw it out there. There are
I only
business.
take easy questions. I don't take loaded questions. Sorry, we gotta go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, after what you went through, I'm sure. What's your best mile time? Yeah, that's a little softball. No, but there's a lot of there's leaders, obviously, whether they are authoritative by title that are on this or upcoming leaders. We're all being affected in different ways by the COVID thing. So let's zoom in on those folks that are staring down the barrel of potential furloughs or layoffs, or they've already had that happen to them, or they're looking at that coming as a leader, making those decisions. Um, what would you suggest from an emotional intelligence and an emotional health standpoint of taking steps towards that and dealing with and addressing these furloughs, these layoffs, these really difficult decisions that are being made right now, without sugarcoating them, but then at the same time the guilt that some of the leaders are going to feel because they actually care and deeply care about their employees. So there's your light question to to close us out.
Yeah.
But what would you say? What would you say there to those leaders that are listening in?
It's a very real problem, and I'm gonna give you an equation, and I'm gonna answer it in from one way. We could spend the rest of the day talking about the different iterations of this. So I'm just gonna give 3 steps that I think will help. It may be that you need different things depending on where you're at in this journey. But I find when I'm coaching leaders and executives and people in general, we fall on somewhere in a continuum, and I heard at the start of the question, like authoritative. We fall somewhere in the continuum of I'm just going to say what needs to be said, and there's an assertion, an aggression, and a boldness, but there's like this aftermath of destruction that people are shut down. And then there's the other end of the extreme of the spectrum of playing nice, of just going along to I'm not going to say anything. I don't want anybody to feel bad. So I'm just going to like quietly lay them off and not have those hard discussions. And so, and then you might fall somewhere on that spectrum. When you're going through a crisis and dealing with tough messages, you have to do 3 things, the 3 C's. Have the courage to be truthful. People need the truth.
Yeah.
Deliver the message that with compassion so the other person can receive it. And then have the curiosity to explore what their truth is and what they need to say in order to move forward. So this is so balance is one of the 6 practices of Thoughtfully Fit. This is about how do you have balanced conversations and balanced relationships. When they're out of balance, it's like, well, I'm just going to tell them they're all laid off. And then all of a sudden, the people who aren't laid off are like, oh my God, this is scary. Am I going to be next? And the morale is down. Or, you know what, I'm just going to quietly lay them off and Friday afternoon and not go in, have the courage to have the conversation directly and do it with compassion. This is hard. I don't want anything less than to have to furlough you at this moment in time. And yet I'm hoping that we come through this. I'm making bold decisions as a leader to try to set us up to come through those so that, in some cases, you can come off a furlough and come back. Right? So courage and compassion, and then curiosity. So given that I'm giving you a tough message right now, what do you need moving forward? How can this help you? How can I help you in this time? And having the curiosity to let them share and vent and be frustrated and design whatever it is that you need. Don't avoid the conversation and don't go in and have it boldly, autocratically, without having that dialogue and that partnership.
That's fantastic. So courage, compassion, curiosity. Darcy, thank you so much. I know that it's like bringing a chef that could put a 12-course meal in front of you, and I'm asking you to give us appetizers because we only have that much time, but thank you. Thank you for feeding us with this information. This has been fantastic. If you want to continue to engage with us, Patrick's going to take it from here with a couple more slides, and then we're going to close this thing out. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Fantastic. I've learned so much. Steve, thank you for helping moderate all those questions. Great stuff. So real quick, Impact of Leadership. We do have an up-and-coming webinar on Monday. This is 5 steps to running highly effective meetings. You can register at the link below, but if you already have registered, you're good to go. I actually will be the speaker that day, so I hope you can join us. Also, we have an up-and-coming Impact of Leadership episode 60, Understanding Personal Types in Workplaces, the personalities, the DISC training. We actually brought these 2 trainers into our office, and we did it with the whole company. It has been fantastic. We have been using the DISC profile to talk to each other, help each other. You can sign up by listening to the podcast below at the link. We hope you do join us. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, here is our contact information. You can please email us. We are checking our email all day long, all night long, like many of you. You can also reach us on LinkedIn. Again, we are all about engaging with you. This is not a one-sided conversation. This is a partnership of connecting with you. So please reach out. We would love to hear from you. And without any further ado, that will conclude today's webinar. Again, thank you, Darcy, Steve, all of you for attending. We do wish you a very healthy and safe weekend. Recharge those batteries, apply what you learned today, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday. Thank you. Take care.